This is Work University, episode 26. This is Work University, and I'm Annalisa Felix. This is where I talk to people from various employment backgrounds and get a better idea of what their job is really like. If you're just graduating or looking to change careers, you're in the right place. Now let's get to it.
Hello, this is Annalisa with Work University, and today I am here with Carrie McGhee. Hello, Carrie. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well, and thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it. So, what is a mortician?
What is a mortician? Well, in the state of Minnesota, where I practice, along with the state of Wisconsin, which I'm also licensed in, a mortician is a professional who prepares a decedent for final disposition, which currently final disposition would either be earth and burial, cremation, or body donation, except if you're in the state of Washington, which just proved that decomposition can be a form of final disposition. Mm-hmm. And in a mortician also, we originate the death certificate, the actual paper that becomes the certified death certificate. We also arrange and perform funerals. And anything else that you can think of that has to deal with dying, death, end of life, final expenses, you name it, we probably deal with it.
To start off, what is your first point of contact with the deceased?
When I pick up the phone, when it rings and someone says, so-and-so has died.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you physically go? Is there transport? How does that work?
Nope. So and the reason I keep probably saying in the state of Minnesota is because all states are very different. Many states have varying degrees of licensure. In fact, in the state of Colorado, you don't need to have a license to be a mortician or a funeral director. In some states, you need to have a license to be an embalmer and then a license to be a funeral director. In Minnesota, we just have one license, and that's mortician. And so I start off with what we call the first call or the death call. And that is when someone, and that someone can be many different people, from a hospice nurse to a nurse at the hospital to a death investigator from the county medical examiner, from a family member, calls and says, my mom just died. Mm-hmm. And then we take it from there. I ask, okay, do we have a pre-arrangement on the person? Because a lot of people are being very proactive and coming and talking to us years prior of ever dying, and just, planning everything out so that when the time does come, because death and taxes are the two knowns in life, mm-hmm. we can really help them out. So I ask a bunch of questions, and then I will go and what we call make the transfer or the removal of the deceased from the place of death and bring them back to the funeral home. And then that's where the real fun begins, because everybody's very different in what their ideas of what they want at the end should be. And so we make arrangements with the family to kind of sort that out, and then depending on what that final disposition is, if they're going to be interred or buried, do we need to do an embalming because that person wished to be publicly viewed, or are we going to go with a direct cremation, where then I'm also a certified cremation operator, and we do have a crematory at our funeral home. Well, not at our funeral home, but we own a crematory in town. And so then we go on to making arrangements for the funeral or the celebration of life or whatever you'd like to call it, and so on and so forth.
Now, when you have to, I guess, for each of these, there's earth, burial, decomp, and death certificate, they all have their template of check-off items. I'm assuming that you have to go through for each person if they want A, if they want B or C. So which is the one that would be the most where there's most things to do? I guess the least I would guess would be cremation.
Cremation. Okay, so urban legend, myths, innuendos, and rumors. Everyone thinks that cremation should be the easiest because
Right.
historically it's been the cheapest. And I could talk for days upon pricing and funeral service, but it is not. It is not the easiest because cremation actually requires us to pull more permits, because once you cremate a body, that is irreversible. We can never bring the body back. DNA isn't destroyed, evidence destroyed.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of layers of authorizations we have to go through so that we can get a body cremated. Whereas we can embalm a body and then bury it and be done with it, because in the eyes of the law, they feel that we can always disinter the body if there's ever been any questions. So cremation is not easier. It actually has lots more paperwork to it. But regardless, it takes the same amount of time to gather the vital statistics information, no matter what type of disposition you're doing. You know, I do have to pull permits, and I have to do various other things. And so across the board, that all takes the same amount of time. Actually, cremation takes a lot longer, the actual process of cremation, than, per se, an embalming.
I see. So you have to pull all of these different permits and check all the boxes, and that takes about the same amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when embalming, or let's say there is an investigation happening,
yep.
I'm sure that can prolong the situation.
Yep. That usually requires a medical examiner gets involved. And that means the body usually is going to have an autopsy, which is a posthumous examination, where it is very invasive. But the reason it is done is so that the most medical examiners in Minnesota nowadays, and I'm just talking Minnesota because in many states it's different, but in Minnesota they're actually forensic pathologists. And so they're very thorough in their investigation during an autopsy due to insurances for the most part, because if your death is not natural or you don't have an extensive medical history, they really want to know what caused your death. On the death certificate, there is manners of death, and in Minnesota, your manners of death can either be natural, it can be homicide, it can be suicide, or it can be unknown. And those are really important because insurance companies look at those when they go to pay out insurance policies.
Right. Oh, gosh. That's a whole different can of worms, I'm sure.
It is.
Okay.
It is. Yeah.
So you have hands on the body, and I can, from my perspective, that seems a little scary.
Creepy. I've been called creepy.
No, creepy did not enter my mind.
Okay. But, well, I have to thank Hollywood for that. But
how does that feel, like, for somebody who is just becoming, a mortician? And if you can remember back, what is that like?
It's a little surreal because, we're not, in our culture, the American culture, we don't have face-to-face encounters with death as often as people do in other cultures. So when I graduated out of the University of Minnesota, we actually have a program of mortuary science in our medical school at the university. I graduated when I was 22 and went to work out in the state of Washington. And at first it was just a little more surreal than anything else. It didn't feel uncomfortable. It didn't feel anything. Actually, it felt, well, if you talk to a lot of morticians, it actually feels quite like nursing or any other healthcare giver. It's just being able to take care of that person. And we're the last ones to do that. So it's many times I look at people and just wonder what their lives were like. I often think, what did their voice sound like? But that's just my sense of humor, I guess. I look a lot at their hands because our hands tell so much about what we did throughout our lives. And it's like a story that will never really be told because for the most part, I don't know that person.
Now, I'm going to switch gears here more into the education part of it. You said there's a program of Mortician Sciences. Is that a bachelor's?
Yes, and the program of Mortuary Science is a Bachelor of Science degree out of the University of Minnesota. There are 4 higher education institutes in the country that give a Bachelor of Science in Mortuary Science. Our state, the state of Minnesota, requires that you have to have a bachelor's degree to attain a license to practice mortuary science. That is not the case in many other states. Many other states just want you to have the ability to pass the national exam. There's a national exam that is given that you have to have a certain amount of mortuary science education to be able to sit for the exam and then to pass the exam.
I wonder why there's different levels of education needed per state when death is so common across the board.
That is a really good question, and that is one that I often think about. I have had the fortune to be able to practice in the state of Washington, which has a dual license and does not require a bachelor's degree. I also practice in Wisconsin, and in Minnesota. Wisconsin does not require a 4-year degree. Does it make us better morticians to have that 4-year degree? No, I would say not, but I can tell you that we are highly educated. Mm-hmm. And as I was saying previously, the state of Colorado does not require a license whatsoever. So, yeah, it doesn't make sense because to practice medicine or law or any other professional type licensure, the education is pretty similar across the nation.
Mm-hmm. Since you got into such an extensive, because a BA is no short feat, so how long before then were you interested in, and how did you get into this, and take me through that?
So I went to the University of Minnesota, and I took a couple of assessment tests, and this was back in the 80s, and they all pointed in the direction of either law or healthcare, where my skills and talents lie. Mm-hmm. And looking through the list of all the different degrees you can get at the University of Minnesota, I came across mortuary science, and I thought, well, it's low unemployment, it is family-oriented, and it is, and this is my sense of humor, I'm Catholic, and I was like, well, I can say the rosary with the best of them. So basically that's how I got into the program, and I graduated in 1990, so I'm on my 30th year of being a mortician. I just love it. Every day is different because even though I have a schedule and there's things I have to do every day because I make appointments for people to come in and do pre-need and other things. I do the marketing for our funeral home. But a phone call can change that. We'll just throw it up in the air, and you just have to be adaptable and flexible. And there's just so many different aspects that are involved in being a mortician, a funeral director. It's just kind of a Cracker Jack box, and you get a great prize.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Well, yeah, but it has lots of business, and I did go on and further my education. I have a master's degree, and so it has the business aspects of it. It has art. It has science. I mean, it's kind of like what is that show on TV that Vegas, NCIS?
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but in a much better way because, I mean, you get the science background to it, and you get the doctor feel to it because we do handle decedents, and you get to have that social aspect of it because funerals are very much a social event. I always tell people, well, what do you really do? And I said, I'm the ultimate party planner.
That sounds about right, and that was what I was going to ask you, because at the end it sounds like you have to put together or coordinate this gathering, and so it sounds like so many different pieces that you're juggling.
It's not for those faint of minute details, because I deal with 1,000 minute details. Although everyone likes to tell me they can do my job, if they actually had to, they wouldn't know how to go about piecing it together, because there's just so many players involved in putting together, as I said, a funeral or a mass, a Christian burial, or a celebration of life. It is, if you truly want to have something special and personalized, I mean, that's what the funeral director does. That's what the mortician does. So cremation became big in this country probably the last 15, 20 years. And what happened is that people thought that cremation was the funeral. And if you ask any funeral industry person, they're going to tell you no, cremation was just a form of disposition. It wasn't meant to take away from the funeral. And people thought, well, we can just do it ourselves. But the thing, what they don't realize is that they're unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. And, of course, we get the rap of fleecing widows and orphans, because funerals are a cost to them. And I always kid, because I'm now into my 30th year of funeral directing, and I say, well, I'm going to retire when I can finally get people to, A, stop calling me in the middle of the night, because that is one downside of it. I mean, it's not like the nursing home is going to rent the room in the next hour. So could we all just let grandma sleep in her bed for another 4 hours and just call me at 6 in the morning? Why do I have to get up at 2? Because they forget that I still have a schedule. I still have to go to work the next day.
So you're on call 24/7.
I am. Yes, wow. I am. Every other night, every other weekend.
Wow.
And so, but the aspect I really would like is that, you know, when someone has a baby, you go over, you see the baby, the parents, and everyone goes, oh, that baby is just beautiful. But they come to a funeral and they look at the decedent, and this is probably the best the decedent's looked in a long time, and they never say that. Oh, she looks so nice and peaceful. No, they whisper to each other, I wonder how much that costs. But it's the same thing. No one ever asked the happy mom and dad, how much did that baby cost you? But coming into this world costs, going out of it costs. But we never hear about the coming in. All we ever hear about is the going out.
Well, I have a question regarding becoming not immune, but your sensitivity.
Desensitized.
Yeah, desensitized, not only to being with the body itself, but dealing with the loved ones.
I actually had this conversation with someone today about how do we as professionals become desensitized but do not lose our passion or our sincerity. And I think it's because there's a point where my family will tell you this, that I'm probably the most hypersensitive person in the world. I cry at commercials. But you give me a sad thing like a funeral, a child's death, you know, very sad things, I'm okay with that. But it's just because I've learned how to ground myself. And you can't teach that. It's something that comes with the experience. You learn to ground yourself. And through the years, there has been a couple of times that I struggled very hard to do that. And one was a little boy's death. The parents wanted to close the casket. And that was tough. That was really tough. And
why is that tough?
Because they tucked them in like any parent tucks their child in before bed. And that just was, I can desensitize myself, but there's just some things that just pull on all heartstrings. And that was one of them. And I also, I was my grandparents' mortician. I was their embalmer and their funeral director, and that was good. And I don't know why 2 years ago I thought when my dad died that I should do that. Also be his embalmer and his funeral director. And I was also his celebrant. And being a celebrant just means that for people who don't have a religious preference but want to have a funeral, a celebrant will write their funeral. It can be very spiritual, but it's typically not religious, and I'm a celebrant. And so I wrote my dad's funeral and also gave it. And that was tough too, because that was really close to the heart, really close.
Yeah. A couple more questions, because I know we're going long on time, but what have you ran across that you would say, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it?
Annalisa, I thought I could say confidently I've seen it all, but every year that gets blown out of the water. That, I mean, we are human beings. We are flawed. Therefore, I will never see it all, because just when you think you have people figured out, they come up with new things. I mean, you can pick a scenario and I can say, yep. I mean, start with urns. The things that people come in with that want to put their loved ones' ashes in, I thought I'd seen it all, but I don't. Every year someone tops it. You know the Folgers, orange, reddish, big canister with the handle? It looks like a detergent bottle.
Yes.
But it has I think it has either a yellow cap or a black cap on it, depending on if it's caffeinated or decaffeinated. I actually put a guy in that this last year.
For the request of their
family, brought it in. I had a funeral for a homeless gal who people got up at time of sharing, and this one gal got up and said about the deceased that her name was Jackie. And this gal goes, I just love Jackie. She made homelessness so much fun. I've had plenty of family confrontations, squabbles. I've played every type of music I think you can possibly hear at a funeral. I've had several extreme requests from families about what we should put in the casket that stays
What's
in the
most
casket.
crazy extreme that somebody's wanted to put in the casket?
I do know, well, the one that always cracks me up the most, and no one's topped it yet, is this guy was a carpenter. And they put all of his power tools in his casket with them. And as we took him out of the hearse and walked him over to the grave, a couple fell down on the side, so they clunked. I mean, these things made noise, and of course they weren't plugged in, and there was no batteries or anything like that. But the guy must have had 100 pounds of power tools with him.
Oh, wow. Now, when being buried, you know, either the urn or the casket, how is it that they're in that plot forever, or how does that work? Okay, so we're not Europe, so we don't have rented grave spaces of 10, 15, 20 years. Typically in the United States, that when you're buried, you're there forever and a day. Okay. We're talking forever. But as a mortician, I don't know, it just seems to, I track this. I have done probably more things that many morticians could only dream of doing. In fact, I've moved a whole cemetery 3 years ago. There was a... What? Yeah, I've moved a cemetery. So is that what it sounds like? Yeah, moving a cemetery. Yep, we dug everybody up out of the cemetery and placed them in a different cemetery, which was about 10 miles down the road. So how many plots or people did you have to move? 52. 48 of them were either sisters, nuns, or priests, and 6 of them were lay people. And that I think I jinxed myself on that one, because when they say that people rest in peace, when we disinterred these people, actually exhumed them, we actually had archaeologists with us because of what the state laws require in Minnesota.
these people were at peace.
But why would you move it? And
because they sold the property. The property, we can't make any more land. We can do about everything else in this world, but we can't make more land. Yeah. And this property was being sold, and the religious order that had owned the property and where the cemetery was a private cemetery felt that the cemetery was not going to be kept up or continue to be a dignified place after the sale of the property. So we moved the cemetery.
And you were in charge of that project?
I was in charge of all the permits that go into moving a person.
What permit would be needed? I'm curious.
Well, we actually had to get a court order because, so disinterment usually means that you're taken out of where you were in the cemetery and you're put someplace else, but in the same cemetery. Mm-hmm. That's what it is in Minnesota. To exhume a body is when you take a body out and you take it out of what casket it was in, put it in a different casket, and you take it and you move it down the road. Mm-hmm. And that's what we had to do because some of these people had been buried for over 100 years, and we didn't know what kind of casket they were in. We didn't know. We didn't know what we didn't know. So we had to first get a court order, which there is a gentleman who graduated out of the university, the program that I did, and also then went on to law school and specializes in funeral service law. Mm-hmm. And he actually got the court order. And then I just did so then we also had to change death certificates because a death certificate will say where a person is interred or what happened to them. And to keep accurate records, I had to go and amend those death certificates so that now they accurately say where the person is at. Because if you talk to anyone who is a genealogist, they will tell you that is one of their pet peeves is that people will be disinterred and no one thinks about changing the death certificate.
So did you run into pushback from their families or friends?
Very few. No, we didn't get any pushback because for a lot of them, these were nuns or priests that families were no longer around. I mean, trying to find who their families were, we did. We made an effort to, but you couldn't find them. So that's why the court order. The judge kind of gave us protection over that.
So who pays the cost for all of the new caskets, for all the permits, for all the lawyers?
That was the religious order. The sisters paid for all that.
Wow.
And they paid for it out of the proceeds of the estate, the land that they sold. So
okay. Well, that's a lot of interesting information about your career and it's good.
We are experiencing a huge labor shortage.
Really?
And so nobody wants to go into mortuary science. No one wants to be a funeral director, because it's a lifestyle. It truly is. It's a lifestyle because we are a 24/7, 365 business. And as I said, I'll retire when I can successfully get the nursing homes not to call me in the middle of the night. But the thing is that it's hard to have a life-work balance.
Sure.
It's extremely rewarding. I wouldn't have lasted 30 years if it wasn't. But we have a lot of people that just look at funeral service and say no, not really knowing what it is about because nobody like you ever finds a mortician to talk to and, find out that we're actually very funny and we actually have very good sense of humor and we don't look like Lurch, and we're very proud of what we do because no matter what the burial customs become in our country, people still die, and they need to be recognized for the life they led, and they need dignity and respect for their bodies, even though they're no longer in them, and that you need a professional to do that.
Yeah. A couple more questions. How is this shortage of morticians, and it seems like it's going in that direction. How is that going to affect the level of service for these deceased?
That's a very good question. I don't think it will. It will and it won't. For states like Minnesota, who know that there's a shortage, but still continue to keep licensing requirements strong, the license won't be watered down. It will just be, instead of people being able to say, well, Mom died on Monday and we're going to have the funeral on Friday, it's going to be more that the funeral home gets to dictate when you have the service. Yeah. Now, funerals are dictated by either clergy, churches, or venues of where you want to have it. It's kind of like weddings. And it's just going to be, like with weddings, and I analogize what I do a lot about like weddings, because like with weddings, we have the clothes, the music, the food, the venue, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I know people who they got their hearts set on a certain venue. They'll wait 16 months before they get married so they can have that service right there. And I think it will become more like that. For other states who are thinking that, they're not going to keep their licensing requirements and that they're going to water them down, that will be different. And then, yes, that will most definitely affect the level of professionalism or care that people will come across.
Yeah. What advice would you give to somebody who was thinking about becoming a mortician as a career?
I would say call your local funeral home or call a funeral home and ask if you can come in and talk to a funeral director. Ask if you could shadow a funeral director. Ask if they have any part-time jobs, because we're not only, so there's 2 licensed morticians on our staff, myself and my boss, but we have funeral assistants who are equally as important as we, because they do all the non-licensed things. So they'll sit visitations, they help out during services, they can transport the decedent depending on where the decedent needs to go. I mean, they're just a huge help. And I talk to a lot of high school students and a lot of like freshman and sophomore college students about the fact that if you really want to know what it's like, good job at a funeral home. Everyone's looking for help, not just licensed help, but help. Yeah. And if you like to dress up in a suit and you like to go to social events and you want to be in a profession, it's really something that you should seek out, because 30 years has gone by in a blink of the eye. I can't believe that. And I mean, I'm just into my 50s. So I've done this since I was in my early 20s, and I'm amazed at how every day is different, and how, yes, there's times where I get burnt out, but I think every profession's like that. And there are times when I just have had enough with human beings. But then there's those times that I pinch myself and say, I was able to witness this. I was able to be a part of this. And it's just an amazing profession. It's not, my family, not one person in my family can have a worse day than me. If I have a bad day, it is a bad day. So when I have a truly good day, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Carrie, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise on this. It's given me a lot to think about that I hadn't before. So, again, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your willingness to want to talk to a mortician and want to enlighten everybody out there that this is a great career to get into. It's not meant for everybody, but there's probably a lot of people who have never even thought about it and now maybe will.
Thank you for listening. I hope you liked this episode. If you have a particular job you'd like me to look into, send me an email at workuniversityforyou@gmail.com. That's workuniversity, the number 4, the letter U, @gmail.com. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.